Welcome to City of Asylum. City of Asylum builds a just community by protecting and celebrating freedom of creative expression. We provide sanctuary to endangered writers and artists so that they can continue to create and their voices are not silenced. We offer a broad range of free literary, arts, and humanities programs in community setting to build social equity through cultural exchange. And by transforming dilapidated properties into homes for our programs, we anchor neighborhood economic development. We are the U.S. headquarters of the International Cities of Refuge Network. ICORN is based in Norway and is an independent organization of cities and regions. They offer shelter to writers and artists at risk, advancing freedom of expression, defending democratic values, and promoting international solidarity. Now you will hear the story of an ICORN artist.
Hello, my name is Irakli Kakabadze and I'm a Georgian writer, performance artist, peace and human rights activist. I was arrested several times for voicing my criticisms and was forced to flee the country after receiving anonymous death threats for my writing. I have been the writer in residence of City of Asylum in Ithaca, and I have visited City of Asylum of Pittsburgh a number of times, and I'm very, very appreciative of wonderful artistic community in Pittsburgh. When a writer goes into exile, he or she often loses access to his or her creative community. And from this, we see writers and artists collaborating across borders. When we create work with one another, we're standing in unison against the forces that would seek to silence dissenting voices of writers, artists, musicians, by casting us out of our homes and our communities. We are saying that we can carry home with us wherever we go, as long as we continue to make it in our century of global citizenship.
My name is Alexis Jabor. I am the senior producer here at City of Asylum, and I'm very happy to welcome you all today, both in person and watching online. City of Asylum ni yokoso. A special welcome to those of you who are new to City of Asylum. We're very glad you're here. As you just heard, City of Asylum's mission is to build a just community by protecting and celebrating freedom of creative expression. We provide sanctuary to writers who have had to leave their home countries under threat of persecution. Those writers, sharing their work across the Pittsburgh community, inspired and launched our now robust calendar of more than 160 free annual public programs. The purpose of our public programs is to bring together artists, writers, readers, and neighbors to learn from one another, celebrate cross-cultural exchange, and build a more just and equitable society. Today, we welcome award-winning author Hiromi Ito and her esteemed translator, Jeffrey Angles. They will first discuss and read from The Thorn Puller, Hiromi's first novel to receive an English translation. Towards the end of the program, we will open up to audience Q&A, in person and online. And after the program, Hiromi and Jeffrey will be signing books, which you can purchase at the bookstore. This program is all co-presented by the University of Pittsburgh Department of East Asian Languages and Literatures and Monkey Stonebridge Press. Hiromi Ito came to national attention in Japan in the 1980s for her groundbreaking poetry about pregnancy, childbirth, and female sexuality. After relocating to the U.S. in the 1990s, she began to write about the immigrant experience and biculturalism. In recent years, she has focused on the ways that dying and death shape human experience. English translations include Killing Kanoko and Wild Grass on the Riverbank. Jeffrey Angles is a writer and professor of Japanese at Western Michigan University. He is the first non-native poet writing in Japanese to win the Yomiuri Prize for Literature, a highly coveted prize for poetry. His translation of the modernist classic The Book of the Dead by Shinobu Orikuchi won both the Miyoshi Award and the Scaglione Prize for translation. And with that, please welcome to the stage Jeffrey Angles and Hiromi Ito.
Too tall. How to make it? Yeah, thank you. Oh yeah, good. Thank you so much for inviting us and here, and I'm so kind of nervous. Well,
No, we're both very excited to be in this very famous place, which
Yeah.
we've heard so much about and seen so often on webcasts and the like.
okay, we came here to read this book, New Thorn Puller, and could you please start speaking in English? You know, I'm too nervous to speak English, so
Okay.
yeah.
What would you like me to say?
About this book.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this book was published in originally written about the year 2006, 2007, and it's a story that is somewhat autobiographical. There's quite a lot of fictional
It
elements
is
in it as well.
fiction, okay?
Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. Good. All right. About a person whose name happens to be Hiromi and who happens to live in Southern California and in Southern Japan. Perhaps not unlike a certain person who happens to be standing off to my right. The narrator of this story has parents who are living in Southern Japan and who are becoming very ill and are approaching the end of their life. So the narrator of the story goes back and forth between the two countries. While navigating lots of cultural differences, the narrator, perhaps not unlike a certain person here, has a British husband who is also living in California and is also aging at the same time. So this book is very much about the expectations that are placed on the narrator of the story by the two different cultures, the different expectations of family in the two different cultures, the Japanese and dealing with the struggle between the two.
Yeah, since I'm a Japanese girl and then a very, good girl for the parents. So since, I was living in California, but then when my parents are getting old and then I was supposed to be there, so I don't know if Americans do or not, but then Japanese would do, and other Asians would do, because we have kind of Confucius and something like that, and I hate it, and that's why I get out from country. But then when they get older, I'm an only child, and, this is fiction, but then I'm telling you my story, okay? And then, I'm an only child, and then when I left Japan, and nobody told me that your parents getting old. I thought people wouldn't die, but it is not my parents' case, and they are getting old, and then, so my mother, when she was 80, she started to get paralyzed, both hand and legs, and she got hospitalized, and my father was living on his own. So I was almost got to and fro, almost commuting in Japan and the U.S. and almost every month, and my husband who died 5-6 years ago, but then he was complaining about that. Your family is here, I know, and my kids here, but then as a good girl, I have to go back there. So it was fun time.
Fun?
Yeah, I became a gold member of the United Airlines. Okay, let's start.
Excellent. Yes. So, this passage towards the beginning of the book mentions the daughter of the narrator, whose name is Aiko. So, I woke Aiko at 7. Every morning she asked me in Japanese, "Do I have to go to school today?" She whispered, "I don't want to go to school." She looked at the school menu and read the hiragana syllables one at a time. "Today's lunch is going to be saba no teri ni," mackerel with sweet ginger glaze, natto jiru, fermented bean soup, nasu no sozu sekizune, pickled eggplants. That just made her whine all the more. "Do I really have to go?" As if she could no longer hold back, her complaints started gushing out in English. "So-and-so's mean to me. There's another mean one, too. They're mean for no reason." I put Aiko in the car and dropped her off by the school gate. The bell rang. It was time for the children buzzing around the schoolyard to go in. I watched as she put on a tough expression and disappeared into the crowd. Next, I stopped at Dad's. The dog was barking happily, barking and shedding hair. A little after 9, I went to pick up Mom in the hospital. I pushed her to the car in the wheelchair. I took her in my arms, helped her to stand, then grabbed the top of her pants to drag her into the passenger seat. Mom said, "Yotto," like she was getting onto the toilet. I folded up the wheelchair and put it back into the seat of the little car. I'm good at dealing with such things. I'm a down-to-earth, practical person, so I get things right the first time round. I joked to her that I could probably get a job as a caregiver. Then I drove to the big hospital and got the wheelchair out again. Then I grabbed Mom by the top of her pants and maneuvered her into the chair. Yotto. She sank in heavily. Then I wheeled her through the automatic doors. I walked and walked down a long chamber, then parked her in a corner of the waiting room. We spent half the day there. Mom said, "Oh goodness, I need to go to the toilet. There's a diuretic in the medicine I've got to take for my high blood pressure." In the restroom, I grabbed the top of her pants and hauled her over to the toilet. She urinated. Mom said, "Oh, feels like something's coming." A soft, slippery bowel movement slid out, and I wiped her clean. I said, "Mom, come forward a little bit." And she swayed her body as she leaned forward. Yotto. As a young mother, I had done the same thing countless times. My baby's bottom was smooth and pale pink. What came out was green and pretty, yellow and green, and so pretty I could almost imagine mistaking it for pudding and giving it a taste. It smelled slightly sour like spoiled milk, so it seemed a gross exaggeration to label it shit. That's why I started using the cuter, more benign-sounding word, poop. Compared to those baby bowel movements, Mom's loose stools were shit. They had the same foul smell as the ones I make. Each time she used the toilet, I had to stick in my hands and help her wash. It wasn't long before my hands started to smell. It didn't matter how much I washed up afterward, the smell never completely went away. As I stuck my hand into the jet of water shooting out of the toilet to clean her up, I said a prayer. May this stink be taken from me.
こんな時にはお地蔵様
At such times, I think of Lord Jizo,
雑踏の昔通った参道の
the Jizo on the bustling pilgrimage route where I once
行
walked,
き着く先の大釜の
the temple with a large cauldron out front,
お線香の煙を胸いっぱい吸い込んで五臓六腑に染み入らせ
inhale the burning incense, let it permeate her body,
母の手の指足の指
through mother's fingers, mother's toes,
四肢の末端の神経たちに
through the nerves running to the end of her limbs,
ぐさりぐさりと打ち込まれたトゲを抜き
pull out the deep, deep thorns penetrating her body,
この手のひらに染みついたうんこの匂いも取り除き
take away the scent of shit clinging to my hands,
ちっちゃな石の胸や腹
as I pour clear water
清らかな水をかけながら
upon your small stone chest and stomach.
苦を
Let
苦を
me scrub away,
苦をゴシゴシと洗い流そう
let me scrub away all of our suffering.
Yeah. Well,
Just to mention, the figure that appears here, mentioned in the story Jizo, do you want to say something about who Jizo is?
Jizo is one of the bodhisattva, and bodhisattva is a technically is a kind of disciple, kind of how do you call it? In the people who in a Buddhist people, and then training themselves, but then they can be a Buddha, but they don't want to be until they save all the people.
Yeah,
So there are so many bodhisattva, but then Jizo is specialized on the kids, also kind of, how to say, tired people, or, that saves all the people who has suffered. So, could you explain that, Sugamo Jizo particularly?
Yeah. So there's one particular neighborhood, not very far from the place where Hiromi grew up in Tokyo, which is called Sugamo. And in this place, for centuries, there's been a very special version of this deity, Jizo, who has been worshipped there for a long time. And it's believed that if you go there and pray, then that Jizo will remove the thorns of suffering. He'll pull the thorns of your suffering out of your body. So for Hiromi's family, I think in real life, for generations, her ancestors had been going to this place to worship. And so this becomes one of the recurring motifs of this book, that wherever the narrator of this book is, whether it be in California, whether it be in southern Japan, quite far away from Tokyo, the thought of this Jizo in Sugamo becomes sort of a guiding force.
So if you happen to go to Japan and don't go to Asakusa or other places, this is Sugamo in Tokyo,
not the tourist places.
And then you can find lots of old women there.
Yeah.
So this is called the old women's kind of fan street or something like that.
Yeah.
So
it's very, very popular, and 3 days a month there are pilgrimage days where huge numbers, thousands of people descend upon this temple in order to worship and to pray.
It doesn't mean that I believe it. Okay, but then since I was kids, my parents are not parents. It's always women stuff. So my mother, my grandmother, and my aunts, they went there if something happened, and I thought, wow, what that's superstitious people. But then now, I write about that.
Right.
And then after I published this book, and then I sent one copy to that temple. And then temple people gave me, sent a package, and then with some kind of scarf and also money, like $100. So I was kind of, getting it almost like a present from Jizo. Okay, so let's do that next one.
I think you told me that you donated that back to the temple, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I come with you.
Okay.
You have to see it.
Okay. So this next passage shifts focus a little bit, and it talks about the fight, some of the fights that she is having, that the narrator is having with her husband back in California.
Yeah, I wanted Jeffrey to translate all my stuff, and we've been really long friends. But then I asked, but then I asked him, don't translate it until my partner dies, because so much stuff not really good for him, and then so
you'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. So once he passed away, I got to work immediately. But yeah. I supported you. I supported your children. I supported your work. I supported you while you took care of your parents. Let me say it again. I supported you. He kept beating angrily on the keyboard. You talk about compromises, but a compromise involves both parties giving something up. What are you giving up? Do you intend to give anything up? You say I'm being negative. Negative! In my work, I've accomplished things no one has ever done before. Do you think that's negative? How can you say that? You feel guilty about leaving the house. You feel guilty about your work. You feel guilty about when you leave me for so long. Everything makes you feel guilty. I'm sick and tired of you feeling so goddamn guilty about everything. The last part was all in capital letters. He was screaming at me through the internet.
その絶叫を聞き取りながら私は考えました。夫の怒りが爆発しておる。
He had blown his lid, but I did think about what he had said.
しかし夫の私感はかなり的を外れている。
His view of me was way off base. Is that how he really saw me?
今まで何を見てきたのか。
Yeah, is that how he really saw me?
家を空けることで引け目なんか感じるものか。
Do I feel guilty about leaving home?
仕事をすることに引け目なんか感じてたまるか。
Do I feel guilty about leaving my work? About doing my work?
これは全く私ではないではないか。
Heavens, no, not me.
その時思い出した。なぜ夫と私が喧嘩したか。その原因。
That's when I remembered why we had started fighting, the reason behind it all. We were having
お鍋。
for dinner. For those of you unfamiliar with Japanese cooking,
お鍋
is a hot pot full of vegetables and meat cooked in broth. Usually it's made over a portable burner on the table so everyone can sit around, cook and eat together. I'd recently bought a brand new electric burner and we'd been having
お鍋
every night. That meant that we were eating
白菜
every night since it's one of the most common ingredients. In America,
Hakusai.
is called Napa cabbage, or simply,
Napa.
and in California, there are piles of it in every grocery store. Napa makes you think of Napa wine, so it didn't sound right to me. One evening, as I was adding some to the,
Onabe.
I used the word
Hakusai.
instead of the English word. My husband didn't understand, so I had to explain. That evening, I'd already had to say enoki mushroom instead of
Enoki.
shiitake mushroom instead of just,
Shiitake.
and bean noodle instead of.
Hakusai. Gomen. Harusame. I'm a Japanese though.
I had to use the absurdly general word
Sauce.
to mean something specific like citrus flavored.
Ponzu.
I always have to rephrase myself for him. So by the time I got to the,
Hakusai.
I was already in despair. We'd been living together for 10 years, and during all that time, he couldn't even learn a simple Japanese word like.
Hakusai.
He was always saying, I love Japanese food. I love.
Onabe.
But could he prove it? To make matters worse, he was trying out the Atkins diet. That meant he was eating lots of high-fat, high-protein, low-carb food. He wouldn't touch rice with a 10-foot pole. How could he possibly claim to understand his wife's culture if he didn't eat rice? I shouted at him, and he shouted back. I wondered what would happen if somewhere down the line, Aiko asked us why we got divorced.
Because of Napa cabbage.
How could I say that with a straight face?
This is actually very, very based on the true story. Yeah.
So, as this progresses, they fight. They fight. So.
思っただけ。Okay, okay, okay, yeah.
Okay. 先に読む？
私も読むのここ。
Oh, okay. じゃあ僕が読む。
No, no, then I go this.
Oh, yes. はい、了解しました。Okay. So they fight. So, and she calls him an old senile man. But I didn't just think it. I broached the subject of age out loud. Oh, damn it. You've gone and done it now. I shouldn't have brought projectiles to a fight, but I did. And now I'd gone and used them. As we argued, I threw peaches at my husband. One buried itself in his skin, grew inflamed, and started to swell. It looked exactly like a bite mark. I'm getting old. I don't have time. My body won't move. His insecurities had mounted, but now he had the perfect excuse. His own wife had bitten him. His rage boiled over. I was wrong, no matter how I looked at it. I'd hurt him, my own spouse, violently. I'd crossed the line. He was justified, and he exploded.
年を取る。
I'm getting old.
時間がない。
I don't have time.
仕事が評価されない。
My work isn't getting the attention it deserves.
しかし時間がない。
But I don't have time.
待っているだけの時間がない。
I don't have the time to
健
wait.
康には陰りが出てくる。
My health is going downhill.
体が思うように動かない。
My body doesn't move like I want it
手術しても
to.
しても追いつかない。
Surgery isn't helping. I don't have time to wait. I'm old. I'm a sexual failure. I'm failed over and over, over and over.
時間がない。
I don't have time for this. I'm old. I've never been in this situation before, and I don't know how to handle it. I don't have time to wait. I don't have time to come up with new ideas. I'm not satisfied. Things aren't getting better. I don't have time.
夫の怒りが止められない。
His anger was unrelenting.
時間がない。
He had no time for me.
妻に。自分に。
He,
妻に。
he vented his anger at me, at himself, at me,
自分に。
but more at himself,
ペニスに。
at his limp cock, at his eyes, at his ears, at his heart, at his knees, at his shoulders, at his lower back, at his elderly, failing body, at his old, decrepit self. Yes, at himself. Yes, at himself.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, even though me, I don't know the person, the narrator, but me personally loved him. Okay. Yeah. Okay, this one.
Okay, so, all right. So this next passage comes a little bit further in the book when the mother is institutionalized in a hospital. And yeah, we'll pick up there. I told Mom, I'm going to Tokyo soon. I'll visit Sugamo while I'm there. I'll pray to Jizo and ask him to remove the thorns of suffering. Mom said, if you're going there, buy a good luck amulet for me. She said they sell them just inside the temple gate. The so-called substitute amulets are the best. They take away troubles on your behalf, allowing Jizo to act as your substitute. They've also got what are called portrait amulets that have images of Jizo on them. You swallow them to heal yourself from the inside out, but the substitute amulets work the best. She told me a substitute amulet won't work if you just carry it around. It's best to burn the little piece of wood it's printed on and then eat it. It's like the bark of the relationship-ending hackberry tree. Grind it up and put it in soup or something is what makes it work. She said if you want to break up with a man, you should walk along the road in front of the Sugamo Jizo temple. Keep going toward Koshinzuka until you reach the tracks. The grave of Oiwa is right where it stops. That also works. Now, Oiwa is a famous ghost from Kabuki. Her husband betrayed and then poisoned her, so she returned as a ghost and took revenge on him and his lover. I say to Mom, but isn't Oiwa's grave in Zoshigaya? No, she insisted. No, the demon mother goddess Kishimo is in Zoshigaya. Oiwa's grave is in Koshinzuka. Get off at Koshinzuka and walk in the opposite direction from the Jizo temple. It's right by the tram tracks. Back when you had that problem with that guy, you know, I worried myself sick. I went there and prayed for help, and sure enough, it did the trick. The two of you broke up right away.
22の時、苦しい恋愛いたしました。
When I was 22, I had a love affair that totally broke my heart.
あまり苦しくて何度も母の前で身をもだえて泣きました。でもお岩の祈りで別れさせてもらおうといくら何でも考えていませんでした。
The experience was so awful that I cried in front of Mom more times than I care to remember. Still, I never would have dreamed of asking Oiwa's ghost to help break us up.
その後も苦しい恋愛には絶え間がなく、恋愛が苦しくなかったこの後なく他にどんな男を母に知られて願掛けに行かれていたか分かるもんじゃありません。母のどの願掛けが効いてこうなってああなってこうなってああなって、そして今ここにいるか分かったもんじゃありません。
After that, I had a whole string of painful love affairs. Come to think of it, I've never had a relationship that was completely pain-free. I wonder how many times Mom had gone there to pray to end my relationship, but here I am. There's no way of knowing which prayers had worked.
悪いことをいっぱいしてきました。
I've done tons of bad things in my time.
しないではいられ
I
なかったんで
couldn't
す。
help it.
女が一人大人になっていこうとしたら生臭いことも悪いことも思いっきりしないではいられなかったんです。
If a woman wants to be her own person, she doesn't have a lot of choice. She's got to steel herself and do some down and dirty things.
その結果、よろずの仏に疎まれたようなこの苦労。
That's why I've experienced so much pain. I felt as if I was being shunned by all the Buddhas.
男で苦労し、子供で苦労し、
I had had trouble with my previous partners and with my children.
また男で苦労して一息ついたと思ったら今度は親で苦労しております。
I had trouble with lots of men and now was having trouble with my husband as well.
よろずの仏に疎まれても
No sooner did I work myself free of one set of problems,
子供の頃から手を引かれ毎月たどり着いてもみじみたいな手を合わせた母の手や祖母の手でゴシゴシ煙を手にも足にも頭にもすり込まれたあのお地蔵様なら大丈夫待っててくれると思いました。
no sooner did I work myself free of one set of problems than a new set of ones came along with my aging parents. When I was a little girl, once a month, someone would take me by the hand to the temple. Even if I was shunned by many Buddhas, when we'd arrive, I'd put my tiny hands together in prayer and Mom would rub the smoke from the burning incense all over my hands, legs, and head. I told myself, everything will be fine as long as I trust in Jizo. And now I thought, he's still there, waiting for me.
What time? Should I do continue one more? Or do we?
Let's do one more. Sure.
So another one from this book. Yeah, the Japanese. My parents was born. My mother was 1924 and 25 maybe, and my father was 1922. And my father went to the war, and he was a teacher for kamikaze pilots. So he survived, but then he actually sent all the kids to the, kamikaze, and he got really traumatized, and then came back, and my mother was a geisha during the war. Anyway, so I was watching my parents. They don't know how to live. They really loved me. So, they raised me up in a very good way, but they don't know how to live. Also, when they get older, I really think that they don't know how to die. They never thought about dying. They don't have any religion. This Sugamo Jizo, the bodhisattva, it's a more like anthropological activity than a religion. So, that's what I'm facing it. Anyway. Okay, so you start.
All right. Mom hated spiders. As soon as she saw one, she'd squash it. She couldn't help herself. Actually, it wasn't just spiders. She'd swat flies and mosquitoes, caterpillars, cockroaches, moths, and just about any other insect unlucky to cross her path. But the image that's really seared into my memory is of us sitting down as a family having a good time when she'd spot a spider. Every time she'd leap up, rush around like crazy, and squash the poor thing. That's why I made the suggestion to her in her bed in the hospital. Mom, you must have killed too many spiders. Maybe the reason you're having so much pain is the curse of the spider spirits. Curses and spiritual merit were familiar ideas to her, so she took me seriously at first. She whispered, "Spiders, you say? When I get out of the hospital, I have to perform some memorial rites to appease their spirits." I had her going, but almost immediately she came back to her senses and rejected the idea outright. Spiders? No way. I knew it was a strange idea, but I was disappointed she didn't accept it.
戦争に裏切られ、
World War II had left my parents feeling betrayed.
虚無の中に投げ出され、
Like everyone else in the country, they were thrown into nothingness.
東京で焼け出され、
Tokyo had burned to the ground,
足を踏ん張って
but they put their noses to the grindstone for years.
生きてきた父と母であります。
And somehow, the two of them, my mother and father, managed to get
信じ
by.
るものなんかどこにもない。
They had nothing to believe in.
大切なものもないかもしれな
Maybe
い。
nothing at all was really important to them.
うちには仏壇がありませんでした。
We didn't have a Buddhist altar at home.
法事にもお寺にも縁がありませんでした。神棚ならありました。
We didn't hold any Buddhist memorial services when people died, and we didn't have a relationship with any temple, but we did have a small Shinto altar at
死ん
home.
だ誰とかが父の夢枕に立って供養してくれと頼まれたから神棚に祀っているのと聞きました。
Dad once told me that the spirit of someone who had died appeared to him in bed and asked him to perform some memorial rites. So
母
that's
が
why
ご
I
飯を
got
あ
it.
げ、
Mom gave rice
父が
offerings.
柏手を打っていました
And Dad。
それなり
clapped his
に
hands to
神や
attract the
仏
spirit's
や霊や
attention.
魂を
I suppose that's why, in their own way, they felt they were paying proper respect to the various gods,
恐れ
Buddhas,
かしこみ
spirits, and
恐
souls
れ
floating
かし
around.
こみ敬う気持ちはあったようです。それはいつの間にか取り払われました。
But at some
高度
point,
成
the
長期が
Shinto
やって
altar
きたのはその後です。
disappeared
東京オリ
too.
ンピックもそ
That
の
was
後で
probably
す。
before the period of the rapid economic growth in Japan, before the Tokyo Olympics,
都電がなくなり地下鉄ができたのもその後のことです。
before the streetcars disappeared and the subways were created.
何にも信じまい。
No, they didn't seem to believe in anything. No, nothing at all.
Yeah.
When I asked Mom what happened to those old things at home, she gave me the usual, "Oh, I got rid of it." It doesn't make sense to hold on to old things forever. You can just buy new stuff if you want it. What a completely nihilistic answer. But strangely enough, Mom did go to the Jizo temple sometimes. Why? What did she believe? What did she want out of the experience? When I think about her and the thorn pulling Jizo, I run up against these same fundamental questions. Why turn to the thorn puller?
That's it. Yeah. And then, thank you. If you read everything, and you will find what she believed. Yeah, that's a kind of. It took a long time for me to think. If they don't believe anything, not religiously, then what they believe in, and it is really astonishing answer. Okay, so we are. Can I? Yeah. So,
sure.
okay. So we are going to read this.
You're in charge.
I don't want to read in English. My English is really, strong accented. And then Jeffrey told me when I speak Japanese, I'm very loud voice. But then when I speak in English, then much more smaller voice. But I have microphone. This is from, but then what's the title?
In English, Wild Grass on the Riverbank.
Yeah. So this is also kind of based on the true story, but this is fiction, okay? I got on board. I got on board. I got on board. I got on and off, on and off. I got on and off. I got on and off. I got on and off, then on again. I got on cars, on buses, then on planes, then I got off again. While waiting in the airport waiting room, the whole room began to move and joined up with the airplane. I left mother behind. I left behind the dogs and the corpse too. I brought little brother and little sister. In the darkness of the airplane, I heard little brother sob. Then we got off the airplane. The long, long belt clattered forward. I pulled little sister's hand. I urged little brother along the moving sidewalk, advancing steadily. We walked at top speed as the long, long sidewalk clattered forward. Long ago, we often walked down this sidewalk. It was fun walking on it. Sometimes I shake free of mother's hand and race along. The sights had not changed. They were just the same. They were the bodies of immigrants who had run out of energy along the way and dried up. They were the bodies of immigrants who had run out of energy along the way and dried up. There were whole families who had nowhere at all to go and had just laid down there and were sleeping soundly. Mother had once told us, the immigrants are dead. Mother had used the unfamiliar word, immigrants. She said we were immigrants too. There were even more of their corpses than before. There were piles dried up corpses in places where there hadn't been any before. There were reasons for them to come to this country, even though they might end up like that, even though they might dry up like that with their children. They had left their land where they had lived. They had left their languages. Adults who had no choice but to come. Children brought by parents who held their hand or carried them along. And when they finally reached the window, they were told, this isn't where you are supposed to be. Go home. Shut your mouth. Just line up over there. But even so, they came to this country. They left behind their languages. They left behind their languages, and we were just like them.
The man who worked there stared at his computer. How long, he asked. How long have you been away from this country? I told him. The man who worked there looked at his computer and gave me a stamp. There's a dirty spot on your passport, the man who worked there told me. You can't get rid of the dirty spot. In order to solve this problem, you have no choice but to transform so that you look like those who grew here naturally, even though you didn't grow here naturally to begin with. Be carried from your native lands to foreign soil where you will grow wild and propagate.
立ちすずめの日へ
urvile.
立ちすずめの日へ
Paspalum urvile.
立ちすずめの日へ
Paspalum urvile.
荒れ地花笠
Verbena brasiliensis.
荒れ地花笠
Verbena
荒れ地
brasiliensis.
花笠
Verbena
おー
brasiliensis.
荒れ地の菊
Conisa sumatrensis. I picked up little sister and helped little brother out the door. The rain had just stopped outside. It was hot and humid as the riverbank we'd left behind. Filled with light, everything overgrown shone luxuriant green. They spilled out in large numbers. Alexa cavarensis,
あ河原アレクサ
Erogeron
姫
canadensis,
昔よもぎ
Erogeron
姫
canadensis,
昔よもぎ河原アレクサ姫昔よもぎ
Alexa cavarensis,
セイバンモロコシ
Sorghum
セイ
halepense,
バンモロコシ河
Sorghum
原アレクサ
halepense. Ones who were not born here naturally but had been transformed into ones who had, came outside. The passengers and the ones going home came outside too. Beside me, Conisa sumatrensis started speaking to Verbena brasiliensis, speaking in her awkward language. She said, "How humid it is. Shouldn't be like this, not here." Verbena brasiliensis responded even more awkwardly. It was always rain. All winter was rain. Most rainy year in 100 years. Verbena brasiliensis began to stutter in her strong accent. The rain, before finally spitting out the words, is
It's
just like
back
back
home.
home.
Thank you. So
This, just to add a few words, if that's okay.
Yeah.
This poem is one of the very, very few, actually maybe the only one I know, even though I'm a poetry researcher. This is the only full-length, book-length narrative poem in all of modern Japanese literature that I know of. It's really an extraordinary thing. We have in English a great tradition of book-length poems, but in modern times, in contemporary times. But in Japan, I think that Hiromi really holds a special place for writing this one. And in this very, very beautiful, powerful book, the main characters begin to interact with all of the plants that surround them. Actually, most of the weeds that grow wild in America are imported plants that were brought over as seeds or spores or whatever with crops or whatever, and then took root and began to kind of propagate here and grow wildly. And so all of these characters, Verbena brasiliensis and so on, these are weeds that came along, with the process of immigration to the United States. So this becomes a very beautiful metaphor for the process of immigration.
I love plants, and then since I love plants so strongly, and my hair is growing, like this, and I feel like I say chlorophyll.
Chlorophyll.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And then this is a kind of based on the true story, but then the true story is halfway of my own story, and also 2000 or something in Idaho or something, a very strange thing incident happened. A family, it's very rural area, and then so isolated from the other people or city or something. They're very isolated, and then the father died, and the mother got arrested because of the child abuse or neglect or something. And then all the kids, 5 kids, were kind of cooped up in the house. It was like a standoff to the outside. People trying to get hold of them, and then that kind of incident happened. So it's based on that story, actually. Yeah.
It's a really fantastic, wonderful, wild story. So I hope that you read it. Why don't we read one poem, Imi no Gyakutai?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Okay. And as our final.
We've been doing together for a long time, so that's why I really trust him, and he reads most of the stuff because you guys don't understand Japanese. So my voice is almost like a noise or music. So this is a main voice.
No. Well, I feel honored to be able to to accompany this wonderful voice here.
We went to the museum this afternoon, and then we saw Bruce Norman's art there. And then this is actually really influenced by Bruce Norman's art, but then not really neon art, but then video art. But anyway, what's the title?
The title is in Japanese. It's imi no gyakutai, which is a wonderful expression that means something like meaning abuse, but it's a very vague expression, which doesn't make it clear if people are abusing meaning or meaning is abusing people. So I struggled to figure out an English way to phrase that, so I just called it the maltreatment of meaning.
あなたは日本語が話せますか？いいえ、話せません。はい、話せます。はい、話せますけど読めません。はい、話せて読めますけど書けません。はい、話せて読めて書けますけど聞き取れません。
Can you speak Japanese? No, I cannot speak. Yes, I can speak. Yes, I can speak but cannot read. Yes, I can speak and read but cannot write. Yes, I can speak and write but cannot understand.
私は良い子でした。あなたは良い子でした。私たちは良い子でした。それは良い。
I was a good child. You were a good child. We were good children. That is good.
私は悪い子でした。あなたは悪い子でした。私たちは悪い子でした。それは悪い。
I was a bad child. You were a bad child. We were bad children. That is bad.
言葉の習得のためには痴漢し反復しなければならない。
To learn a language, you must replace and repeat.
私は醜い子でした。あなたは醜い子でした。私たちは醜い子でした。それは醜い。
I was an ugly child. You were an ugly child. We were ugly children. That is ugly.
私は退屈です。あなたは退屈です。私たちは退屈です。それは退屈だ。
I am bored. You are bored. We are bored. That is boring.
私は憎い。あなたは憎い。私たちは憎い。それはもう憎しみだ。
I am hateful. You are hateful. We are hateful. That is hatred.
私は食べる。あなたは食べる。私たちは食べる。それは良い食欲だ。
I will eat. You will eat. We will eat. That is a good appetite.
私は食べない。あなたは食べない。私たちは食べない。それは悪い食欲だ。
I won't eat. You won't eat. We won't eat. That is a bad appetite.
私は意味する。あなたは意味する。私たちは意味する。それは言葉の伝達だ。
I will make meaning. You will make meaning. We will make meaning. That is conveying through
私は日本語を
language.
使う。あなたは日本語を使う。私たちは日本語を使う。それ日本語だ。
I will use Japanese. You will use Japanese. We will use Japanese. That is
私
Japanese.
は意味を剥がし取りたい。あなたは意味を剥がし取り。私たちは意味を剥がし取り。それは意味を剥がし取る欲望だ。
I want to rip off meaning. You want to rip off meaning. We want to rip off meaning. That is the desire to rip off meaning.
私はいっそ言葉をただの素材に貶めたい。あなたはいっそ言葉をただの素材に貶めたい。私たちはいっそ言葉をただの素材に貶めたい。それはいっそ言葉はただの素材だ。
I want to show contempt for language as nothing more than raw material. You want to show contempt for language as nothing more than raw material. We want to show contempt for language as nothing more than raw material. That is, language is nothing more than raw material.
私は機械的に近いして現実にありえない文を作る。あなたは機械的に近いして現実にありえない文を作る。私たちは機械的に近いして現実にありえない文を作る。それは機械的に近いして現実にありえない文を作るんだ。
I will replace words mechanically and make sentences impossible in real life. You will replace words mechanically and make sentences impossible in real life. That is replacing words mechanically and making sentences impossible in real life.
意味を剥がす。
Rip off meaning.
音が残る。
Even so, sound remains.
それでも私たちは意味を探る。
Even so, we search for meaning.
指を差し出せばそれを吸う新生児の原始反射。
The primitive reflex of a newborn sucking a finger one sticks out.
私は指を差し出せばそれを吸う新生児の原始反射です。あなたは指を差し出せばそれを吸う新生児の原始反射です。私たちは指を差し出せばそれを吸う新生児
The
の
primitive
原始反
reflex
射
of
で
a
す。
newborn sucking a finger, I stick out. The primitive reflex of a newborn sucking a finger, you stick out. The primitive reflex of a newborn sucking a finger, we stick out. The primitive reflex of a newborn sucking a finger, that sticks out.
私は意味が。
As for me, meaning.
あなたは意味が。
As for you,
私
meaning.
たちは意味が。
As for us, meaning
意味だそれは。
is meaning, that is.
伝達する
Do
な。
not communicate.
私は伝達するな。
As for me, do not
あなたは
communicate.
伝達するな。
As for you, do not
私たちは伝
communicate.
達するな。
As for us, do not
それする
communicate.
な伝達だ。
Do not do that. That is communication.
切り裂かれて血まみれの意味はきっと惨めで嬉しい。
Meaning, ripped apart and covered in blood is surely miserable. That
私
is
は
happiness.
血まみれの意味は惨めで嬉しい。
I am happy, meaning covered in blood is miserable.
あなたは血まみれの意味は惨めで嬉しい。
You are happy, meaning covered in blood is miserable.
私たちは血まみ
We
れの
are
意
happy,
味は
meaning blood covered,
惨めで
meaning
嬉しい。
covered in blood is miserable.
血まみ
The
れのそれ
blood
の
covered
意味の
meaning
血ま
of
みれ
that
の
is
惨めさ
blood
だ。
covered misery,
それ
and
嬉しい。
that is happiness.
Well, okay.
How
we
many
have a-
poets do we know that like to take revenge on language so much?
Yeah. And then I thought this poem is actually kind of shit. But then he translated, and I saw it. Wow, this is quite interesting. So I rescued it.
I said, this is work of genius.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have 5 minutes? And is there any kind of questions?
We have more than 5 questions.
Huh?
We have time for, yeah.
We,
We have a lot of time for questions.
yeah. Fire away.
All right, shall we? Yeah, why don't we sit down?
Wow. Okay.
Do you want to stand? Okay, all right, stand. All right. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So those of you here in person, if you could please raise your hand, and one of us will be around with a microphone. And everybody watching online, you can use the Ask a Question button, and one of us will see your question and read it out loud for our guests. So, would anybody like to kick us off? Yes, right there.
Jeffrey, what is the most
Hang on.
All right.
Thank you.
Can you all hear me? I thought I'd stand. Oh, for Pete's sakes. Jeffrey, I'm interested in what you thought might have been the most challenge in translating Hiromi's work. I mean, what phrases, pieces, or just in general, because I'm interested in the translation aspect of this.
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. Actually, this book, The Thorn Puller, was a huge challenge for me because in it there are tons of quotations, tons of quotations, which are culled from all sorts of different sources. Some from classical Japanese, some from modern Japanese, poetry, from manga, from Hiromi's own friends. And at the end of each chapter, actually, she'll say, I borrowed the voices of such and such. I borrowed some text from such and such. And so she hints at where these things are from, but they're not actually ever marked in quotations anywhere in the book. And so all of these are in different styles. Some of them are in, like if you know Japanese, desmascho. Some of them are in, like honorific language. Some of them are in very humble language. Some of them are in the Japanese of 1,000 years ago. Some of them are in Japanese of 500 years ago. So there's actually like a lot of, it's a very polyvocal text with lots and lots of quotations woven in. And so it was sometimes difficult to figure out how to manage all that in English. And I'm not, and that's really difficult in English because we don't, what should I say? I mean, yeah, there is such a thing as Middle English and Old English and so on, but I don't know any of those things. So so all of my translation ended up being in very modern Japanese, modern English, sorry. and so, how to negotiate all those kind of different styles that are woven into the text was a challenge. So.
Can I say something?
Please.
And then the reason I put, lots of quotation is when I started to speak English much later, like how old, I don't know, 30, 35 or something like that. I came across, a friend who speaks English. And then I came this country at the age of 40. Then the beginning of my speaking English experience, and I always feel like, this sentence I heard this time, where? What kind of voice? So every time when I speak English, I'm much kind of patched, people's voice and situations and then the place and the time. And I don't have that when I speak in Japanese because I'm sure I learned Japanese almost exactly the same way, but I was too little to remember that. So it very naturally flows. So, but in English is not. So that's why I started to do this quotation. Yeah, I borrowed the voice from this and that. And the interesting thing is one of the part, actually the part we read today, I read it in Germany, in German translation. And then one of the audience said, I have a question. It sounds very much like Kafka. And yeah, then this is a quotation from Kafka, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, no. So actually, as I was working on this text, I was very, and if she was quoting from a text like Kafka that I could identify, then I would go back and I would look at some English translation of Kafka and borrow the language from that. So that was a huge task to go back and start finding all these quotations. And actually, I was saved by the fact that many of the things that she quotes in the book don't have English translations at all. So I got to make up my own, which is a lot easier, So, yeah.
I have a question from the online audience here. Dear Hiromi-san,
Hi.
how does it feel to go back to your works from the past, translated by Jeffrey, and revisit and relive the experience after all these years? Does it give you inspiration to compose more pieces? And the question asker is Izumi from New York, originally from Fukushima, Japan.
なんてすみません。I sounds like I understand English, but actually I speak, but then listening is very difficult. はい、どうぞ。
翻訳で昔の作品がもう一回読むとどのような気持ちですか？
Oh,
インスピレーションを受けるんですか？翻訳で読むと。
not really. Actually,
Not really.
not really.
You don't get new inspiration?
Once it's old stuff is old stuff, and then it's like a shit, So I don't want to touch it. I don't want to smell it, So I'm much more eager to work now, Like actually, I want to read the stuff I'm working now, but he doesn't translate it yet. So that's why I'm doing the old stuff, but then very reluctantly.
It's it's very interesting. There's always a time gap in translation,
Yeah.
right? She publishes something, it takes some time for me to work on it, and then some years go by, then it takes some time to find a publisher, and so there's always a time gap. And meanwhile, Hiromi, my very dear friend here, is impatient. Like, why couldn't you translate this thing that I wrote yesterday? So
Yeah.
so there's this interesting time gap between, I think, the way that the English world sees her work and the way that her work is seen in Japan. So I wish that the process of translation were a little bit faster,
But he has to work his own poetry, so I understand that.
Thank you so much. It's actually a question for Hiromi and for Jeffrey. You seem almost like old friends, or have a great relationship. When did you first meet each other, and how long have you been working together?
I'll tell the short version of the story. But when I was a graduate student, I read her work for the first time, and I was like, wow, I have never heard anyone who sounds like this in English or Japanese. I read lots of Japanese poetry and read a pretty good amount of English poetry too, and I'd never heard anyone like this. And so this was, I think, around around the year 2000, I think. I had gathered together a couple of friends who were also very interested in Hiromi's poetry, and there happened to be an Asian Studies conference in the Association of Asian Studies meeting was being held in San Diego, very close to where she lives in Southern California. So we put together a panel, and we dared to invite Hiromi to the panel. And much to my wonderful, thrilling, and terrifying surprise, she actually came. Our relationship started because I had translated some passages from her work that I wanted to discuss in my presentation, but I felt stupid reading the text in front of the crowd when the author's right there. So I asked her to read it, and I had actually never heard her read out loud. So Hiromi, she came out and she read, and she sat down on the floor and started pounding on the floor with her hands, and just read it with machine gun rapid fire. And I was like, oh my God, I can't read my boring English translation like this after such a dramatic performance. So I sat down on the floor with her and I imitated her style of reading. And afterwards she said to me, I want to be your friend.
I never seen anybody who, the translator who did the same thing as I did. So we are almost like identical, and English, and he's a boy and I'm a girl. So that's different. So
we're the mirror images that way, I guess.
So that's very interesting because I've been writing about, child rearing or, abortion or sex or even menstruation or something, very, very kind of women's body. And then he translated and he read it. And then, so I think it's kind of open up the world to have a kind of canal.
Canal? Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of
a channel.
Yeah, channel to outside the world. And then I really enjoyed it, since then.
Yeah, me too. I think I've received more inspiration and energy from her than from just about anyone on the planet. So, yeah. I mean, you can see how much energy is packed inside of this body right here. Yeah.
Okay. Is there any? I think someone over there. Yeah.
You mentioned that Hiromi's work is viewed differently in Japan than it is here, that we have yet to catch up. Could you describe that?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of that, as I mentioned, it has to do with the time gap of translation. But she is so productive. Actually, I think she needs not one translator, but maybe 10. How many books do you have? Like 50, 60, something, And I think I've only done 3 so far. So, I feel like the pressure is really on, if there's any translators out there who need work. She's done a lot of really interesting work, essays about. Years ago, she became very famous in Japan by writing, as she said, about childbirth and pregnancy, and feminine sexual desire, things that I found especially fascinating, because of my own work in gender studies. But those things haven't been translated yet. Those are some of her best-selling works and still in print today, after decades. She's like the irreverent Dr. Spock in Japan with her very
Not
with her
really,
books
actually.
with her books about child rearing. But also you've written wonderful books about plants, about your dogs. A very, very beautiful book about her dog. And so there's so much. We're only unfortunately seeing just a snippet of the entire picture of the wonderful world of Ito Hiromi in English right now.
Yeah, I'm always called myself as a poet, but then actually my expression is not only, in Japan poetry is like this. Maybe for you, this kind of how to put and short.
Yeah, short lines.
Yeah. And then I don't do that. And much more like a prose, or sometimes looks like essay, looks like critics, and looks like anything, and then put together, and then that makes one literature. So that's what I'm doing it now. So
yeah, she's, as you might have figured out, she's very irreverent and likes to break down expectations and talk about all sorts of things that people are typically afraid to talk about sexual desire, about menstruation, about death. Something that we all experience, but try to ignore as much as possible. But another thing that's really delightful about her is that she likes to ignore the boundaries between genres. You know what I mean? I think in bookstores we've got the poetry bookshelf, the essay bookshelf, the essay shelf, the fiction shelf, and so on. But in her work, it's really kind of impossible to draw those lines between the genres, and that's one of the reasons I think she's so refreshing. It's just like she's got this energy, as you can tell, that just overflows all kinds of boundaries. Which
That
wonderful.
energy causes lots of trouble. You know that. And then if I don't have this, I'm much happier, I think, but just happen to have this. And, well,
What kind of trouble?
yeah. Oh, so many, multiple kind of marriage and so on, and then child sharing. So I can't say that loudly,
One of the things I think that's really interesting, though, about this trouble, I gotta say, is that I feel like she's always about 10 or 15 years ahead of where literary critics are. In the 1980s, when feminist criticism was still kind of nascent in Japan, she was at the very, very vanguard of writing women's poetry. She began writing about the experience of immigrants and transnational literature, 20 years before this was popular in the West. She was always she started writing about death. Now death is a very fashionable academic subject. But she started writing about that 15 years before people pick that up as a subject. So there's something very interesting about your literature. I feel like, if we look at your writing, you are writing the things that 15 years from now people are going to be talking about.
Such a wonderful word, and I'm so flattered. Thank you so much.
No, I think it's true.
Yeah.
It's really true.
All right, we have a bunch more questions came in online, so we'll see what we can get through. First up, we have a question from Han, who is from Chicago and went to your U Chicago event earlier this week.
Yeah.
Came back and listened to this event too. They would like to ask if both of you have ever considered doing an audiobook with bilingual reading. I'm going to guess from your face no.
Audiobook? Nee.
The audience
I love that
need my
idea.
existence. That's what I thought. And then, I think so. Then even if they don't understand, my existence, my energy is kind of reach them. So that's what I think. If you want to make it, you make it.
I'd be happy to do it.
Yeah, okay. So go ahead. Without me.
Without you.
Without me. Yeah.
No, actually, I should mention that Hiromi does have one CD. It was made, I think, in the around 2000 or something, called
Tanikawa-san?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah, a long
Called
time ago.
Masters of Modern Japanese Poetry or something. It's the first time I ever heard her voice. And it's a really wonderful CD. I think it's maybe out of print or something, but it was.
But then lots of stuff on YouTube.
Yeah, there's some.
You put it up.
There's some. Yeah, there's some. But I think we get better with age. More times we're together.
Yeah.
So.
All right, and I think I can combine these last two online questions. One is, what is your most recent poetry about? And then what are both of you, what do you have upcoming? What are you working on?
My recent one is, let's see, wow. It's lots going on. And then one of the, now I'm writing is about my father's experience. And then also, have you ever read the children's book called My Father Dragon? Some people know that, right? By Ruth Garnett, Ruth Garnett, yeah. And I am the first kids to read the book in Japan.
Literally the very first kid
Very
ever
first.
to read it in Japan.
And people ask me, how do you know that, Oh, because my father was a printer, and then he brought a gallery proof to home. So I read it, the first one. So, I'm writing about these things. That's my... And then also I'm writing about my dog. And I published one book about my dog and about my, dog who died, the age of 14. That was German Shepherd. And now I get, another German Shepherd, and also I got a wild dog, So I moved to Japan, and I just adopted, a wild dog. This is not a stray dog, anything. Wild dog who lives in the mountain. But then I always wanted to get, koi dog or wolf dog and something like that. But then I'm not really kind of wild situation, and I didn't do that. But this wild dog is so fun. And then I can't put a leash on yet. In 2 years, I can't put leash on, so she's not yet, fixed. So it's so difficult to live with her, and I really enjoyed it. I'm writing about that.
Yeah, she's quite the rebellious dog. I just was visiting Hiromi in
Oh, yeah,
Kumamoto,
you saw her.
and she wouldn't come anywhere near me. Very sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
I'm working on some translations of her. I've got 5 books coming out this year, I think, in translation,
Wow.
which is kind of incredible. Somehow, I don't know, everything kind of came to a head all at once. I've got a book of poetry in Japanese that is approaching completion, and I'm starting to try my hand at writing a novel. So that's
Yeah.
a whole new adventure for me.
Yes.
But
Okay. Any closing remarks before I take us out?
最後の挨拶か何かありますでしょうか？
Oh, yeah. This is really first time for me to come to Pittsburgh. And when I was young, I read the the biography of Andy Warhol. And one of my friends translated into Japanese, so I read it. And I thought it's much more like a different kind of place I imagined. So I'm so surprised, actually. And actually, my partner's son is living in this town. So it's, I don't want him to come. So I'm going to see him tonight, but then, it's kind of mixed feeling, how can I do it in Pittsburgh?
It's interesting. I think that her American family didn't really see this poetic side of her until I started translating her. Like even her own partner, Harold, the one who was fighting so much in this book, he had never really kind of fully appreciated his own partner until he began to see the translations.
Yeah.
So it's interesting about those things.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, as one closing remark, I wanted to say a huge, enormous thanks to everyone here and to University of Pittsburgh, which made it possible for us to come here, and then also to Meg Taylor, who is there and is the genius editor who ushered this book into completion. And I think without Meg's midwifing, this book may have not, not found its final form, which is so wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. I'll just very briefly say thank you all so much for coming. Books are for sale in the back at the bookstore counter. Online, they're for sale at the green button that says purchase this book from City of Asylum Bookstore. Hiromi and Jeffrey are happy to sign books up here on stage after the program, both for those of you in person and if you order a book online, we can also have that signed. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.